After a short boat trip to a different part of the Philippines, I was introduced to Tony's other relatives and associates. A young teacher in charge of a junior class invited me to film the coinciding school's activity of parading in the street in several groups. Their displays were enthusiastically applauded by the excited parents and other spectators, and the air was filled with much laughter. It created an atmosphere similar to the annual Mardi Gras parade in Sydney, and the occasion probably provided a much-needed break from people's usual day-to-day concerns. Later, I talked to a group of young teachers and a few of their students at a girls' school about the importance of education, self-confidence, and courage, and my lecture was greatly appreciated. I was to spend the night at the home of an important member of the community involved in police work. He and his family welcomed me with open arms, and were extremely happy about my visit. Happy to sleep in a simple but comfortable room, I was asked to choose one of their young children, a boy or girl, to keep me company at night. I was extremely concerned about this issue. They exclaimed, "It is not good for any man to sleep all alone, especially in a foreign country, no matter where he comes from." I suppose I was ignorant about some of the traditions of other cultures. My upbringing and early education did not include this kind of generosity, and I felt uncomfortable with the idea. Sleeping with young children, particularly somebody else's children, was not in my agenda. Then I thought that they must have trusted me so much that they felt happy about a very special visitor sleeping with them in order not to feel lonely. If there was no other choice but share my bed with any of them, I still could not do it, even in extreme circumstances. I would just sit somewhere outside, watching the stars until the morning, without regret, while they slept. There was an extraordinarily fine line I had to avoid and abstain from being accused of any type of undesirable closeness, for even a soupçon of thought of this kind could not be tolerated on my part. The next day, after my partially damaged bank account was finally restored, so gracefully, by Edita's repayment of what she took from me before her return to Melbourne, unwillingly at first, but due to pressure from her brother, I decided to help some people financially overcome their immediate stresses, and we planned to enjoy a trip to the mountains and volcano lakes, while I would pay all their expenses. Imagine how it made some people feel and how they appreciated my unexpected input. Initially, before leaving, however, Edita did not intend to pay back what she had taken from my wallet without permission, unjustly claiming that I owed her the money anyway. Obviously, she could not see the point, that without any money I would be in strife. I wondered if she valued the welfare, let alone the life of another human being at all. Certainly, her declaration of love towards me could only be pretense, and not a genuine one, right from the beginning. I decided to stay in the Philippines for a while longer, with the intention of helping some people, and those who invited their friends to come with us were thoroughly excited. They hired a car with a driver, and I was content to pay all the expenses, just to see people smile and be happy. Some of us, including me, climbed the high hills, where we all enjoyed wonderful food, and visited the sulfur dioxide-laden volcanic lakes. After a short trip back to Manila, Tony, his son J.P., and I visited several historic sites. The river restaurant we frequented was one of the highlights of my adventure, and this is also when I experienced the taste of Filipino escargot soup for the first time. We visited several shopping malls, similar to ones in the States. In fact, some were American-owned, and JP was looking for good quality sound equipment. His unique expressions and repeated words could psychologically clearly be read, but I was not in any position to oblige, and deliberately appeared uninterested. I had a distinct feeling that Tony was not too pleased about his son's tendencies, although he was a very pleasantly presented young man. If I had the means, I would most certainly buy those things for him as a gift, for I like to see everybody happy without expecting anything in return. Unfortunately, some people considered me an idiot because of my readiness to assist. However, JP was happy to see the film Aladdin with me. At the end of my journeying, despite their desire for me to stay a little longer, I took my flight from Manila Airport to Sydney and Melbourne, after spending a little time drinking cups of coffee with Tony and son. I returned home apprehensively in a taxi driven by an Indian student, and on arrival at Chelsea Heights, I was greeted in a chilled fashion by Edita, who immediately spoke of how much money I supposedly owed her. There was no mention of how my trip was, not any smiles or a welcoming word. It felt like attending a funeral. In truth, I felt unwelcome. As life went on, I elected never to owe anything to anyone. However, we had no closeness with each other due to her known characteristics, although Edita's close associates kept advising me about how well matched we were and should therefore get married soon. Many of her other friends, on the other hand, bombarded me at every available opportunity to tell them their fortunes, speaking to them all about their spiritual needs and possible love affairs. As far as they were concerned, as per the only information and advice given by Edita, I was nothing more than a good psychic and fortune-teller, totally ignoring my intellectual standing. Many stories told about Edita by her associates did not paint a beautiful picture. They all pointed at her tendency to be easily led by any man who she often invited into her life. I have never been a person to judge anybody easily, for it is not part of the moral codes I have been brought up with. I prefer to discover it all directly from their personal expressions and behavior. However, observing Edita asking any well-dressed man about his attire and inviting him to her place was a little unusual. I decided not to inquire about anything like this, for I did not want her to classify me as jealous. It was not my interest, and therefore I remained completely unstirred. She worshipped her son as if he was the Christ, and more intelligent than other well-educated people, including me. However, Robert was an average boy with an extremely spoiled characteristics, wanting to have everything which shone brightly for himself, never wanting to share anything with any of his friends. Occasionally I took him to the city, often visiting the Minotaur bookshop, where he chose several comic books and magazines. I gladly bought them for him while thinking about my son Claude. If he had still been living with me when at Robert's age, he would also probably be interested in these books. But then again, most certainly the witnesses who belonged to Satan's counterfeit Christianity would oppose that too. Edita remained uninterested in contributing towards the cost of those magazines and other reading material the boy was keenly interested in. I believe his interest was initially encouraged by one of his best schoolmates, another boy from a broken family whose mother was Maltese and the father of Japanese origin. Robert spent a lot of time with him and talked about the other boy's flamboyant father and sexist interests, but that did not stir Edita in the least. After a short visit from Gus's associates from Holland, Edita often emphasized that she would not worry if the boy had girlfriends or was intimately involved with other boys, just like those Dutch friends. I was unsure what she was aiming at. However, it was none of my business. I strongly believe that Edita hoped there was a chance of getting married with me and demanded that Robert call me Pops all the time. This could be due to some of her friends' strong encouragements for Edita to consider that the boy looked like me. I am yet to discover the major similarities they spoke of. I, the foreigner, could never replace his father, Gus, and his love towards his son. How could one bypass his own father's love? In addition to this, there was a certain resentment towards me, observable in Robert's behavior, although not yet thoroughly emphasized. But the usual pattern was very clear. Yet Edita preferred, or was incapable of seeing, the emerging problem. Perhaps I was meant to be purchased for a very specific reason, to fill the desperately sought-after vacancy. Let me tell you about one of those behavioral anomalies I directly experienced. In the city, once Robert started to shout at me loudly, naming me anew in front of crowds of people, curiously looking at us, because he did not get what he wanted, and kept calling me idiot, idiot, idiot. I felt he was repeating his mother's description of me, as she saw fit. Although I gently warned him against calling anybody like that, he yelled again, "But you are an idiot," and kept going with his mantra for a while longer. I softly told him again not to continue with it, but he was relentless in calling me further with this new name. I told him that I was going to tear the comics I had just bought one by one every time he called me with that ugly word. However, he was like a dog with a bone. As he continued with his performance, I started to show him how serious I was. He began shouting even louder, "You are an idiot, idiot, idiot," adding, "I will call you only an idiot. You can't do anything about it, idiot." At that moment, a couple of police cadets were walking just opposite us, and he shouted again, "You can't do a thing. You are not my dad. If you hit me, it's child abuse." Right in front of the officers, I smacked his rear end and told him to go and complain about it now. The gentleman in uniform could only laugh. He stopped, shouting he was going to stay there, but since I was not interested playing this game, I told him, "Fine, you stay here then." As I distanced myself just a little, he panicked and started to run behind me. He, the little Robert, was so furious he could literally drown me in a drop of water. He sulked and kept calling me all the way to Chelsea Heights in the crowded train with his newly adopted mantra. When we finally arrived home, the very first words which came out of his mouth were all about how naughty Pops was and that I hit him. It was evident that Edita was very angry with me by simply looking at her face. She kept quiet for a very short time, then suddenly exploded, loudly shouting, "Robert would never call anyone like that. Never he would use that word you are telling me. Never, never. You must have done something really bad to hurt him. You have no right to complain about my angel." I remained unstirred while she continued with her outburst. "I think somebody is telling me lies. and it cannot be my angel. My Robert never tells lies." This was so reminiscent of my supposed family, and Robert was very happy with his achievement, joyfully giggling. This was the way life happened around me when I was led to live in Chelsea Heights on totally empty promises. This occasion provided me with everything I needed to know. I stayed there a few more days in complete silence, during which Robert kept going with his tantrums against me, but Edita took it as a passing trend, and had already forgotten what her son had been calling me, as if it had never happened. The truth of the matter was that I had been looking for suitable accommodation elsewhere for a considerable time without making any mention of it. Unfortunately, my friend Reg had not been doing well with his health, gaining more weight, and the doctors urged him to lose some of it before they could do something with his heart, which needed a bypass operation. I visited him several times with Edita, both at his home and in the hospital. She held his hands in an effort to calm him, which he thoroughly appreciated, as he later told me. He was extremely grey and green when lying in the hospital bed for one last time. He turned 64 in August 1994, and a week later he passed on, with the cancer having quickly spread into his entire body. It was very sad to see someone with a great ability to sing and a mind which was logical and philosophical as his pass on so early. He was familiar with my personal tragedies, such as one of my daughters attempting to poison me, and later their ungrounded accusations with all sorts of ugly things when I was struggling with my health, enduring hernias and prostate-related complications. I remember how Reg had once helped me when I was so gracefully granted access to my son on a fortnightly basis, just for a few short hours, because Magda demanded that my access to Claude had to be only a supervised one, obviously on advice from Jehovah's Witnesses. In other words, I could only pick my son up in the presence of another friend, and as I mentioned elsewhere, Reg volunteered to do so. As I have shared his own sad story by listening to him, he also shared my unfortunate state due to the Jehovah's Witnesses fanaticism my wife had been conducted into. Repeating myself, when I suggested that my first daughter stay with her mother for a little while, she attacked her mother, and when my other daughter left on her own accord to stay with her mother, Birgit saturated my carpets, books, and sound equipment with petrol, as she later admitted. But for some reason the matches did not light. Disappointed, she left. Reg was the only person who tried to console me, while at the same time bombarding me with his own tragic stories. I continued to conduct my group activities while also attending the gatherings at Muriel and Archie's home in Springvale, where guest speakers imparted their wisdom, and one of them was a reasonably well-known psychic artist, Marion Ruffin. She was allegedly able to see spirit people and draw their images using pastels and charcoal. Alas, all her drawings depicted the same characters under different names. She got paid nice amounts of money for her efforts, and people were convinced how genuine she was. I discovered the same images people purchased from her, carrying different names as she was supposedly told by those spirit beings whose portraits she drew. She had been attempting to advertise her art in specialized papers without considering how people would react when they discovered exactly the same drawing of a spirit person under a different title. It looked as if all those spirit guides and other spirit persons looked alike. She was genuinely convinced that she was drawing the images of different people. However, this was an interesting phenomenon to study for it could be part of a psychological consideration. Leslie Crossingham, who frequented Muriel's on a regular basis, was befriended with Wendy Joy Clark, and together they conducted the smudging and cleansing ceremonies of Native Americans. As time went by, their frequent disagreements, conflicts, and argumentations became more habitual with Edita. Robert, on the other hand, showed no respect towards me, considering me like an imbecilic man after observing his mother's behavior. Fortunately, I was not his father, or his mother's husband. I was certainly not interested in building any relationship with her in the circumstances, especially after discovering more about her personal and behavioral issues. I had more important matters to deal with. I was hindered in producing works of art and exhibiting them. This did not increase my chances of earning the necessary buying power. How could one earn money through art exhibitions here and in overseas countries when one could not even work from home? I was lured to live in her home with the promise that I could paint there, but soon after she demanded that I did not use her home like a studio. What was I meant to do after being prevented from doing what I started to establish? She was now pressurizing me with lots of money apparently being owed to her, which was certainly not the case, and demanded that I give her a number of paintings which I had created while living in St. Kilda. Her initial interest in me became very transparent. She obviously wanted a new father for her angelic son, and someone to pay her expenses, but since there was no relationship developing, and particularly the chances of engaging intimately with her were diminishing, she tried to use all kinds of excuses to make me realize I was only needed in her life to fulfill her needs and wants, or else I should move on. That was precisely what I had been planning to do, without saying a word about it. Even when things were a little calmer, Edita attempted to continually belittle me at every opportunity. She might now have forgotten that she had been doing it particularly in front of her angelic son, thus leading him to treat me as if I was either totally ignorant or a subservient person. Despite her opposition, I kept silent and continued painting whenever opportunities presented. As mentioned, I was commissioned to paint a subject after Frazetta's Bounty Hunter for a client, and allowed Robert to have a go at painting the eyes under my supervision. He was now a little more relaxed with my presence, and Edita was almost over the moon. I wondered if she realized what else I could teach him, if she had some respect towards me. She had the opportunity and destroyed it, for I was now going to leave them at the first opportunity, depending on the availability of different housing. I believe that I started Robert in something worthwhile, and hoped he would continue with it. Despite all this, his odd behavior towards me continued, obviously Edita seeing it as something I must have deserved, without considering his special attitude. I believe he was trying to please his mother. In the meantime, I became friendly with Robert's father, who now lived with his new lady friend from the Philippines. Edita was exceedingly critical of her. For my part, I was spending some time lecturing in the city as well as the auditorium at the Theosophical Society in Russell Street. My talks included philosophical considerations, science, and psychology. What particularly impressed me was that they accepted all faiths under one unity and made no attempt to discriminate against any belief or ideal. My lectures almost always attracted large crowds. I continued with similar subjects and specialized meditations aimed at relaxation of the mind and body. It was the same at Malek and Edgar's whenever I conducted meditations.